Hello and welcome back. So we move on to lecture 5 by basically continuing the same on the same topic that we focused on lecture at the end, at least of lecture 4. So our goal today is the same like the previous one in the previous lecture. So in the beginning of lecture number 4, I mentioned that we're going to study various basic techniques for authentication. We're going to pay particular attention to the mechanisms that have been standardized, which is something that we did not cover in the last lecture, and this is something that we will do today. In addition to that, we will start the protocol that can be used as building blocks. We will see a very nice example in this video, and we'll also give some guidelines for designing good protocols. Furthermore, we will study a wide range of protocol flaws, list various known and typical attacking techniques, demonstrate and analyze each of the attacks, and we will become familiar with a common phenomenon, like last time, that authentication protocols are likely to contain flaws even when designed by experts. Now, the main difference between this lecture, let's say, and the previous one, apart from the fact that we're going to talk about some standards and that we will also give some guidelines for designing good protocols, as I mentioned. So the main difference is that in the previous lecture, we assumed that we know nothing about asymmetric cryptography. So all the protocols that we discussed and we analyzed, they were based on symmetric primitives, right? So Alice and Bob, they could communicate by only they could secure their messages by only using symmetric key encryption, and therefore we had a trusted third party in the middle that it was a kind of unconditionally trusted entity that at the end knew everything, right? Because it had access to all the secret information that finally Alice and Bob were exchanging. Now, today we will assume that we know how asymmetric crypto works. So basically, we will start using public and secret keys, right? Public and private keys. So the problem that we will be focusing again is the same, like Alice and Bob, they wish to, let's say, establish a secure key, right? They want to communicate securely. So the first part of that problem is how Alice and Bob will securely exchange their public keys, right? In one of the previous videos, we mentioned that making sure having a mechanism that it will allow Alice, for example, to verify that the public key that received is indeed Bob's public key and not Eve's, for example, or not someone else's public key, is of paramount importance, right? So that's what we're going to focus on now. So let's start. Do you remember these two guys, Needham and Schroeder? In 1987, they published a paper where we described in the previous video, they tried to, design a secure key establishment protocol between Alice and Bob using symmetric key encryption. As we showed, the protocol had some flaws that were anyway highlighted by two other guys, Denning and Sacco. Anyway, in that paper, Needham and Schroeder, they also designed a protocol using public key cryptography. So let's see what they did, these guys. So recall that now you are Alice, you wish to communicate securely with Bob. Basically, the first step that you need to do is to get access to Bob's public key, right? So again, we have three entities, Alice, right? Alice, Bob, and a central authority. Now, I don't really call this a TTP, a trusted third party, just because it is not exactly a TTP. I mean, the job of that guy here is to distribute public keys, right? So that guy there in the middle, Trent, he's managing all users' public keys, like Alice's and Bob's public keys, right? So he has access to the public keys, but he does not have access to any secret keys. If you compare this with the symmetric setting, with the previous protocol that we described in the previous video, you will easily see that basically in the previous scenario, Trent knew everything because he was first of all the one that he was generating the session key, which means that he had access to the secret that would be used to secure all the future messages between Alice and Bob. So if Trent was not 100% trusted, then basically he could, you know, see all the messages that would be exchanged between Alice and Bob. Now, in that case, Trent only has access to the public keys, and we know that knowing the public key does not reveal anything about the corresponding secret key, right? Good. So let's see how the protocol would work. So in the beginning, the first message would be very simple. I'm Alice and I would like to talk to Bob, right? So upon reception of that message, you are Trent. What would you do? I mean, you got a message from Alice saying, hey, I would like to contact Bob. So what does this mean? Basically, this means that basically Alice is asking you to send her Bob's public key, right? So that's what Alice is telling you with that message. Like, okay, hey Trent, please send me over Bob's public key because I need to communicate with Bob. So how would you do that? I mean, you are Trent, you know that, okay, we know how symmetric and asymmetric crypto works. So how would you do it? Again, I suggest that you pause the video and think about it a bit. Right, so Trent, he needs to send this public key in such a way that Alice can be sure that this was sent by Trent and not someone else, and also being sure that the public key that was sent by Trent is indeed Bob's public key. So in order for Alice to be sure that a message has been sent by Trent and not someone else, it means that Trent, he should probably use his secret key to sign something, right? So what would you sign? So probably you would decide to sign the public key that you want to send to Alice, as well as Bob's identity. So basically Trent would use his secret key SK of T, and it would encrypt Bob's public key, PK of B, as well as Bob's identity, right? Upon reception, Alice would use Trent's public key to, first of all, verify that this message has been sent by Trent. Okay, so verify the signature, and then based on the properties of RSA signatures that we mentioned on lecture 2, by using Bob's public key and decrypting basically this part, Alice gets access to the actual content of that message, right? So by decrypting this, Alice knows that, okay, there is a public key here, and that public key corresponds to to a user called Bob, right? So she can be sure that Trent send over the correct public key. I mean, the correct key that Alice asked on message 1. Right, so now that you've got Bob's public key, what would you do? I mean, now you can obviously contact Bob directly, and you know his public key, so basically you would encrypt the message using Bob's public key, probably. So what would you do there? So imagine that the message that you will send needs to have some kind of information inside it that later on, if you receive it back, let's say, okay, later on would allow Bob to prove you that he's Bob, which means that he knows SK of B, right? So you will use PK of B to encrypt something, and then in one of the later messages, you would expect him to send the same thing back to you, right? Okay, let's see how this works then. So basically, Alice would generate a nonce, a random nonce in A, and would use PK of B, Bob's public key, to encrypt that nonce along with her identity, so that Bob knows the identity of the user that is asking to communicate with him. Good. Upon reception, Bob, who is the only one who has access to SK of B, he would decrypt that, And first of all, he would see that Alice wishes to communicate with him, and then he would also find out NA, the nonce, the random nonce that Alice generated for him. Good. So what would you do then? Right? Again, I would say that, guys, you need to stop the video and think a bit about it, right? So what would you do? I mean, now you need to contact Alice, right? But you don't really have Alice's public key, right? So you need to make sure that you find Alice's public key. How would you do that? I mean, you run the same protocol like steps 1 and 2 that Alice ran with Trent, but now from the other side, Bob with Trent. So Bob basically will send a message to Trent saying, hello, I'm Bob. I would like to communicate with Alice. Basically, hello, I'm Bob. I would like to send me Alice's public key. And Trent would do exactly the same like he did on message 2. So he would use his secret key to encrypt PK of A, comma, Alice. And here is the message, right? Upon reception, Bob basically, he verifies the message by using Trent's public key. Then he finds out Alice's public key, and then he contacts back Alice by encrypting NA with Alice's public key, right? And then what would happen, right? So upon reception, basically, Alice would decrypt this and find out, first of all, NA, which is the nonce that she sent on message 3 to Bob. And by seeing this NA there, she can be sure that basically Bob received her message correctly, and that she's communicating with Bob, because she's the only one who can decrypt that message, right? Because he's the only one who has access to SK of B. Now, that message also contains another nonce, NB. Why do we need this? So we need this exact for the same reason that we needed the first nonce, NA, right? So Bob, he would expect Alice to send back NB, and by doing this, Bob would be sure that Alice properly decrypted that message, right? Which means that Alice properly she has access to SK of A, right? So Bob can be sure that basically he has established a connection with Alice and not someone else. Good. So I suggest that again you get a pen and paper if you haven't done it already. You write down all the steps of the protocol and you try to understand exactly what's going on here. Okay, it's a good practice. Okay, good. Now Law's attack. So here is, I mean, a snapshot of the entire protocol that we just described. So I say that this protocol is too simple to have a bug, right? I hope you agree. Now, that's why an attack was discovered only 17 years after the first publication of the protocol. Good. So, guys, usually when I do this lecture in the traditional way, let's say I stop here and I ask the students to try, to be divided into teams and try to find the attack on their own. Usually after 10 or 15 minutes of trying and there is no progress, I give them a hint. So the hint is this one. So that guy Law basically observed that this protocol can be considered as the interleaving of two logically disjoint protocols, right? So if you look on that guy, he was, I mean, he probably he was quite smart. I mean, he realized that this protocol is just the logically disjoint of two protocols, right? So steps 1, 2, and 4 and 5, they are concerned with obtaining public keys, right? While steps 3, 6, and 7, they are concerned with the authentication of Alice and Bob, right? So take some moment and process what I just said and look at the exchange messages and try to exactly understand what I said and map those words here with the actual protocol. Okay, so steps 1, 2, 4, and 5, they're just about obtaining public keys, while steps 3, 6, and 7, they are concerned with the authentication of Alice and Bob. So now that you have this tip, again, I suggest that you stop and try to find the attack on your own, right? Good. So let's see loss attack in a bit more. Let's try to describe it basically. So the attack will take place based on these three messages, right? Where Alice basically, she has just obtained Bob's public key, right? And she generates a nonce NA, and she sends this encrypted message to Bob. Then Bob, at a later message, after obtaining Alice's public key, will encrypt a message with Alice's public key containing the nonce that Alice generated, as well as a fresh nonce NB. And then at the last stage of the protocol, Alice would prove to Bob that she knows SKA by sending back NB encrypted with Bob's public key. Good. So the attack involves two simultaneous run of the protocol. Now, again, take some time to think about what I just said. Two simultaneous run of the protocol, right? So, unlike the previous protocols the protocol that we described in the previous video, here we require that Eve, basically our malicious adversary, will run two simultaneous runs of the protocol, right, in parallel. Okay, she will have two sessions basically in parallel to run in order to make in order to be able to launch the attack. Now, in the first run, Alice establishes a valid session with Eve, right? So what we require here for the attack is that Alice, the legitimate user Alice, establishes a valid session with Eve, which, recall that based on the Dolev-Yao threat model, Eve is a legitimate user. In our case, Eve is a corrupted user, but this is something that is not known by Alice or Bob or anyone, right? So Eve is seen by everyone as a legitimate user. So Alice initiates basically the whole thing by establishing a valid session with Eve. Now, immediately when Eve gets, let's say, a request from Alice to establish a valid session, she starts a second run of the protocol where Eve will try to impersonate Alice in order to establish a bogus session with Bob, right? Now, this is another tip in order if you want to try a bit more, and if you haven't found the attack yet and you want to try a bit more, this is another tip. I think now things should be much more clear. It should be more easy to try. Good. Right. Now, this is called an interleaving attack. And the result of the attack is that Bob thinks he's talking to Alice while he's actually talking to Eve. Now, what does this mean? I mean, if you think about this, that Bob thinks he's talking to Alice, it means that somehow Eve managed to convince Bob that she's Alice, right? And how can we manage from these messages? How can we manage to convince Bob that that Eve is Alice? The only way that we can do this is by being able to decrypt, let's say this, okay, or by sending back to Bob a valid encrypted version of NB, right? If Bob managed to receive a valid encrypted version of NB of the nonce that he sent earlier to Alice, and that nonce was encrypted with Alice's public key, then Bob would be sure that you are Alice, that Eve is Alice, because this message was encrypted, this nonce was encrypted with Alice's public key, and only Alice has access to a SK of A, right? Therefore, Bob would be fooled and believe that he's talking to Alice while he would talk to Eve. Now, the tough part is, that Eve doesn't have access to a SK of A, right? So honestly, she cannot decrypt that part, right? So if you want to try a bit more to find the attack, you need to think in a bit more nasty way. You cannot decrypt that part here, right? You cannot find NB by decrypting it. And to be more precise, I don't think you can find NB at all. Nevertheless, you will be able to send this message, this valid encryption of NB to Bob. Good. So let's see finally how this attack works, right? So Alice basically, she has established a valid session with Eve, right? So at some point, Alice will send this part to Eve, right? Which is basically NA, a nonce that Alice is generated, Alice's identity, and everything will be encrypted with Eve's public key, right? So Alice obtained Eve's public key through Trend. Now she has Eve's public key, and she contacts Eve by sending a random nonce encrypted with Eve's public key. Now, upon reception, what would Eve do? So Eve basically would get that message, decrypt it, and then encrypt it with Bob's public key. So again, Eve obtained Bob's public key through Trent because he has opened a bogus session with Bob, right? So he obtained Bob's public key through Trent, and then he contacts Bob saying, "Hello Bob, I'm Alice. Here is a nonce I generated for you." And everything will be encrypted with Bob's public key, right? Good. Then what's next? So next, basically, Bob would reply back to Eve saying, "Hello Alice, right? Here is the nonce that you generated for me, NA. And here is a new nonce that I generate for you." And everything would be encrypted with Alice's public key, right? So imagine that Eve now had received a message that contains two nonces, NA. I mean, she already knows NA from the first message that she received from Alice, so she doesn't really care about NA, not at all. And NB, which NB is the fresh nonce that generated by Bob, and at the end of the protocol, that nonce would have to be sent to Bob encrypted with his public key. So whoever sends that nonce to Bob, it means that he has access to SK of A, which means that he's Alice. That person would be Alice, right? So upon reception, what would you do if you were Eve? I mean, you receive a message that is encrypted with PK of A, you can't do much. The only thing that you can do, honestly, is just forward that message to Alice, right? So saying, "Hello, Alice. Here's what I generated for you. I'm Eve, right? I'm not Bob or someone else. I'm just Eve. We have been running a valid session here. Okay, so I'm Eve, and here's what I'm sending to you. I'm sending you the nonce NA that you sent me a little bit earlier, as well as a new nonce NB that I generated for you in order to make sure that you are Alice." And then upon reception, what would Alice do? She would use basically SK of A to decrypt that message and then find out, first of all, NA, so she could be sure that, okay, Eve got NA correctly, and then she would encrypt NB with SK of A, right? So she would, so Alice basically, she encrypts the nonce with PK of E with Eve's public key, and then upon reception, Eve basically, she uses her secret key to decrypt that nonce, find out its value, and then contact Bob by encrypting this nonce with Bob's public key. So upon reception, Bob can be sure that he's talking to Alice while he's talking to Eve. Now, let's see exactly what happens. So Alice starts a normal session with Eve. Eve uses the nonce NA to impersonate Alice to Bob on step number 2. Then Bob, who is thinking that he's talking to Alice, he creates a message that contains two nonces, NA and B, and is encrypted with Alice's public key on step 3. So Eve can't read it at all, right? So what she will do is that she will forward it to Alice for decryption on step number 4, and then on step number 5, Alice expected such a message from the first run, so she returns NB to Eve, and finally Eve decrypts the message and returns to Bob to complete the second run. And that's how basically we managed to fool Bob. Again, write it down, guys. Try to figure out exactly what Eve did and how she managed to fool Bob, right? Now, a few more words about Law's attack. So, a crucial step in the attack is Alice's decryption of Bob's nonce and B for Eve, right? We already mentioned that. What we did not mention is that basically Eve used Alice as a decryption oracle, right? And this is a really common technique in this kind of scenarios where Eve, the malicious adversary, will try to use one of the legitimate principles as a decryption oracle. So Eve was not able to decrypt the message that was encrypted with PK of A and contained the two nonces. Nevertheless, she knew that Alice could decrypt that. Okay, so she knew that that message was encrypted with PK of A, and she knew that Alice had access to SK of A. So she tried to make Alice decrypt this without Alice knowing that basically in the background she's basically helping Eve to fool Bob, right? Now a fix is to include the responder's identity in the message 6 of the Needham-Schroeder protocol, right? So imagine that if that message contained Bob's identity there, or anyway, it contained an identity there, it would have been impossible for Eve to launch the attack. So basically, on message 6 of the Needham-Schroeder protocol, we should add the identity of the sender, right? Now, this means that the message that contained the two nonces, NA and B, it would also have to contain Bob, the identity of the principal who generated NB. If Alice received that message, she would drop that connection just because, I mean, she would expect that message that contained NA from Eve and not from someone else, right? So immediately, Alice, by decrypting this, she would be able to understand that something is going wrong here. So she would drop the connection immediately. Good. Now, the fix represents an instance of the following principle suggested by Adabi and Needham in a paper entitled Prudent Engineering Practice for Cryptographic Protocols. This is a paper you should anyway Google it and download it online. I will put also on the Moodle page of the course for those who have access there. And it's part of your basically course. It contains some really nice guidelines of how to basically design and analyze cryptographic protocols. Now, that principle that was suggested by Adabi and Needham related to this attack is that if the identity of a principal is important to the meaning of a message, it is prudent to include the principal's name in the message. So exactly what we did in that fix on message 6 of the Needham-Schroeder protocol. So we realized that it's really important to include Bob's identity, the identity of the user who generated NB, in order for Eve to be unable to launch the attack. So I hope you liked it and you understood the attack. If not, please write down everything with a pen and paper and try to see all the logical steps that you need to go through in order to first launch an attack, and then the logical steps that you need to follow in order to prevent Eve from launching such an attack. Thanks a lot. We will continue with the next video on that lecture. Bye.